A merchant sits in the fading shade of a woven tent in an ancient Near Eastern market, hoping the weight of our morality balances out the weight of our guilt. We assume righteousness means moral perfection. But Judah, motivated by fear that his remaining sons would also die, secretly refused. He sent Tamar away to her father's house and ignored her, effectively condemning her to a life of isolation and vulnerability. Judah broke the right order. He abandoned his relational obligation to the most defenseless person in his family. Tamar's deception was an act of absolute desperation. She took extreme measures to force Judah to fulfill the covenant obligation he had ignored. When Judah sees the staff and the ring, he is not saying that Tamar's methods were morally flawless. He is admitting something much deeper. He is confessing that in the structure of their relationship, Tamar was the one who fought to preserve the family line, while he was the one who abandoned his responsibility. She fought for the covenant. He broke it. Therefore, she is more tzedek than he is. This scandalous story proves that biblical righteousness is not about maintaining a spotless personal record in a vacuum. It is about fulfilling the demands of a relationship. It is about protecting the vulnerable, honoring your commitments, and doing right by the people God has placed in your care. If righteousness is deeply relational rather than just behavioral, we have been taught that it is an abstract legal status, a flawless behavioral checklist. To be righteous, in the modern mind, it completely changes the scale. It means God is not merely measuring our private religious habits. He is measuring how we treat our neighbors. And centuries later, the ancient prophets take this exact relational standard and apply it to an entire society. The smoke of 1,000 sacrifices rises over the temple in Jerusalem. The smell of roasting meat and burning incense fills the courtyard. The priests are executing the rituals with absolute precision. The choirs of musicians are singing the ancient psalms flawlessly. To a casual observer, this is the height of religious devotion. By any modern standard of private piety, these people are doing everything right. But outside the temple gates, a prophet stands in the street and delivers a terrifying message from God. I despise your religious festivals. Even though you bring me burnt offerings, I will not accept them. Away with the noise of your songs. These are the words of the prophet Amos, and they echo the exact same warnings delivered by Isaiah and Micah. God is looking at a people who are rigorously keeping the religious rules, and he is rejecting their worship completely. Why? Because while the incense was rising in the temple, the vulnerable were being crushed in the streets. Is to keep the rules perfectly and never step out of line. It is an exhausting, terrifying standard. The merchants were using rigged scales to cheat the poor. The wealthy were buying up land and forcing families into generational debt. The widows were being ignored in the courts. The people assumed that as long as their private religious rituals were correct, God would overlook their public cruelty. But the prophets shatter that illusion by pairing our word, tzedek, with another Hebrew word, mishpat. In English Bibles, mishpat is usually translated as justice. But just like righteousness, we have distorted justice to mean only a courtroom penalty for breaking a law. In the ancient Hebrew mind, mishpat was much broader. It was the active intervention required to fix a broken situation. It meant stepping in to defend the widow, the orphan, the immigrant, and the poor. Throughout the Old Testament, these two words, tzedek and mishpat, are constantly locked together. Righteousness and justice. They are the twin pillars of God's kingdom. If tzedek, righteousness, is the perfectly accurate stone weight on the merchant's scale, mishpat, justice, is the action you take. When you discover the scale has been rigged, righteousness is the standard of right relationship. Justice is the work of restoring that standard when it has been shattered by human greed. This is why Amos shouts his famous command over the noise of the useless temple songs. And if we are honest, most of us know perfectly well that our scale is tipping in the wrong direction. Let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. This changes everything about how we measure our own goodness. Private religious piety without social justice is unrighteousness. You cannot claim to be in right relationship with God while actively ignoring the brokenness of your neighbor. If the scale in the marketplace is rigged, the sacrifice on the altar is rejected. God refuses to separate how we treat Him from how we treat the most vulnerable people made in His image. This is a beautiful, breathtaking vision for human society. But as you read through the history of the Old Testament, a devastating reality sets in. The standard is clear, but humanity is completely incapable of maintaining it. Generation after generation, the kings fail, the priests become corrupt, the people abandon the covenant. The scales are constantly manipulated. No matter how many prophets are sent, humanity cannot sustain the right order. The relational obligation is broken beyond repair. If God's righteousness simply means holding us to this standard, we are entirely without hope. So when humanity universally fails the standard, what does God do? How does a truly righteous God respond to a completely unrighteous people? If righteousness is a strict moral checklist, and humanity has completely failed the test, then the arrival of a righteous God should be terrifying. But if righteousness simply means maintaining a perfect moral record, the biblical narrative contains a massive, glaring contradiction. If God's tzedek simply means He acts as a cold, calculating judge who balances the scales of morality, then a broken humanity has only one expectation: absolute condemnation. But when you read the poetry and prophecy of the Old Testament, a strange contradiction appears. Listen to the prayer of David in Psalm 31. In You, O Lord, do I take refuge. Let me never be put to shame. In Your righteousness, deliver me. Stop and look closely at that wording. If you are guilty, the absolute last thing you should ask for is to be judged by the righteousness of a flawless judge. A guilty person asks for mercy. A guilty person asks the judge to look away. But David does not ask God to set his righteousness aside. He asks God to use His righteousness to save him. This contradiction reaches its peak in the book of Isaiah. In chapter 46, God speaks to a rebellious, failing Israel and says, I am bringing my righteousness near. It is not far away, and my salvation will not be delayed. In chapter 51, God declares, My righteousness draws near speedily. My salvation is on the way. The poetry of Isaiah uses Hebrew parallelism, a literary structure where two lines repeat the same idea using different words. Notice what words are paired together. God's righteousness is paralleled with His salvation. His tzedek is His rescue. This completely shatters our modern courtroom framework. The biblical writers repeatedly attach the word righteous to deeply flawed, chaotic, and morally compromised people. How can God's righteousness be the very thing that saves a guilty people? The answer brings us back to the core meaning of the word. Righteousness is not merely an abstract legal status, it is relational faithfulness. Centuries earlier, God made a covenant with Abraham. He bound Himself to this people. He promised to bless them, to rescue them, and to ultimately use them to restore the world. When Israel broke the covenant, they acted unrighteously. They failed their relational obligation. But God is different. God's righteousness is His unyielding, uncompromising commitment to keep His promises, even when the other partner fails. His tzedek is His faithfulness to the covenant, because He is righteous. He cannot abandon the relationship. He will step into the chaos, confront the corruption, and restore the right order Himself. God's righteousness is not the reason He destroys His broken people. It is the reason He runs toward them. This is a stunning revelation of the character of God. It turns a word of terror into a word of profound hope, but it immediately creates a massive theological crisis. If God's righteousness means He rescues failing, rebellious people, because of His ancient promise, does that mean the rigged scale in the marketplace no longer matters? If God simply forgives the guilty, Noah is called a righteous man. Yet, his story quickly descends into drunken isolation. Abraham is counted as righteous. Isn't he ignoring the victims of their injustice? A God who ignores corruption in the name of love is not practicing mishpat. He is abandoning the standard entirely. How can God restore the broken balance of the world, honor his covenant promises, and rescue a deeply guilty people without ignoring their failures? To understand how God resolves this impossible tension, we have to turn the page into the New Testament. And this is the precise crisis the Apostle Paul confronts in the first century. A scholar sits in a dimly lit first-century room, pacing the floor as he dictates a letter to a small group of believers in the center of the Roman Empire. The man is the Apostle Paul, and the letter is to the Romans. He is staring directly at the impossible tension of the Old Testament. How can God be perfectly just, condemning the brokenness of the world, while simultaneously rescuing the people who broke it? When the Hebrew scriptures were translated into Greek, the rich, relational word tzedek was translated into the Greek word dikaiosine. But by the time Paul is pacing this floor, the religious leaders of his day have done exactly what we often do today. They have stripped the word of its relational heart. Yet, he repeatedly lied about his wife's identity, risking her safety to protect his own skin, and turned it into a rigid, behavioral checklist. The Pharisees believed that if they could just keep the law with absolute perfection, they would finally achieve Dikaios sign. They believed they could balance the cosmic scale through sheer willpower. But Paul looks back at the history of Israel and realizes a devastating truth. The law was never designed to fix the scale. The law was simply a brilliant light, exposing the fact that the scale was irrevocably broken. No matter how hard humanity tried, they could not fulfill their side of the covenant. So God does the unthinkable. He does not lower the standard. He does not ignore the injustice. Instead, he steps into the broken order himself. This is the defining revelation of the New Testament. Jesus of Nazareth does not arrive merely to hand down a clearer moral checklist. He arrives to embody the ultimate tzediki. He lives out the perfect balance of righteousness and justice. He touches lepers, feeds the poor, rebukes the corrupt, and perfectly honors the Father as fully God. Jesus demonstrates God's unyielding faithfulness to the ancient covenant promise. As fully human, Jesus does what humanity could never do. He perfectly fulfills our relational obligation. He is the true standard. He is the flawless, unaltered stone. David is held up as the gold standard of a righteous king. Yet he abused his absolute power to commit adultery and murder. But what happens to the massive, accumulated debt of human injustice? What happens to the rigged scales, the crushed widows, and the generations of broken promises? In Romans chapter 3, Paul explains that God presented Jesus as a sacrifice to demonstrate his righteousness. Notice that Paul does not say the cross demonstrates God's rage. The cross demonstrates his righteousness. At the cross, the impossible tension is finally resolved. God does not sweep human corruption under the rug. The violent, destructive consequence of our rebellion is absorbed completely. Justice is served. The rigged scale is confronted. But simultaneously, God's relational promise to rescue his people is fulfilled. Through Jesus, God takes the penalty of our unrighteousness upon himself, freely gifting us his own status of right relationship. As Paul writes, God is proven to be both just and the justifier. This revelation completely dismantles the foundation of fear-based religion. You do not have to spend your life frantically trying to balance the scale with your good behavior. The true, perfect weight has already been provided on your behalf. Jesus is your righteousness. But this does not mean we simply sit back and do nothing. When you understand what God has actually done for you, it completely reorients how you are meant to live today. If righteousness requires a flawless behavioral checklist, the biblical authors are handing the title to the exact wrong people. If we are honest, much of modern Christianity feels exhausting. It feels like an endless, repetitive project of sign management. You lay your head on your pillow at night and mentally review your day, tallying your failures, your moments of anger, and your hidden compromises. You hope your few moments of patience or prayer were enough to tip the scale in your favor. You are constantly asking, "Am I perfectly good? Did I measure up today?" The fear that God is sitting in heaven with a ledger, waiting for you to fail, is paralyzing. And the quiet, terrifying answer in the dark is almost always no. But if biblical righteousness is not a pristine behavioral checklist, then you are carrying a burden God never asked you to carry. The cross proves that you cannot balance the cosmic scale through your own willpower. And more importantly, it proves that you no longer have to try. The crushing weight of moral perfectionism is lifted. Your standing before God is not secured by your flawless record. It is secured by the covenant faithfulness of Jesus. You are declared righteous not because you earned it, but because He gave it to you out of His unending mercy. This freedom, however, is not an invitation to apathy. The air is heavy with the smell of crushed cumin, raw wool, and dry wheat. A buyer stands waiting, his hands calloused from the fields. The contradiction becomes even more uncomfortable when we examine how the Bible describes God Himself. If righteousness, it is an invitation to a completely different kind of life. If righteousness simply meant private moral perfection, you could lock yourself in a quiet room, avoid the world, read your Bible, and be a perfectly righteous person. But tzaddik is deeply, stubbornly relational. You cannot practice right relationship in isolation. You are freed from the terrifying scale of earning your salvation, so that you can turn your attention outward to the broken world around you. God is asking you to step into the mess. The question is no longer, "Am I perfectly good today?" The true question is, "Am I relationally faithful to God and my neighbor today?" What does this actually look like in an ordinary week? It means keeping a difficult promise, even when it costs you financially or emotionally. When you refuse to manipulate a customer to make a higher commission, you are maintaining a righteous scale. When you pay a fair, living wage to the people who work for you, it is a deeply spiritual act. When you use whatever power, time, or resources you possess to protect someone who is vulnerable, you are stepping into the ancient calling. This is what it means to practice tzedakah. It is the daily, quiet work of restoring right order in the spaces you inhabit. Is simply strict moral law-keeping. We would expect God's righteousness to be expressed exclusively as cold, calculated punishment for every rule breaker. You are no longer paralyzed by the fear of making a mistake. You are empowered to join God's active work of justice. Mishpat. You become the accurate stone on the scale of your community, not to earn God's love, but because you have already received it. You are called to embody the character of the God who rescues. Once this pattern becomes visible, the entire architecture of your faith changes from a posture of fear to a posture of active, courageous love. But there is one final piece of this pattern that brings everything together. To truly understand how this changes your permanent standing before God, we must leave the theological realm and return to the physical dust of the marketplace where this all began. Let us step back and look at the entire architecture of what we have discovered. The journey has taken us from the dust of an ancient marketplace through the scandalous history of Israel's patriarchs, into the shouts of the prophets, and finally, to the foot of a Roman cross. At every step, the meaning of righteousness expanded. It grew from a physical measurement of true weight into a profound vision of social justice, and finally, into the breathtaking revelation of God's unyielding faithfulness to His ancient promises. We discovered that a perfectly kept religious checklist means absolutely nothing. But that is not how the ancient Hebrew writers usually describe it. In the Psalms and the prophets, if it is not matched by a deep, active care for the vulnerable, we learned that God's righteousness is not a cold, calculated judgment waiting to destroy us, but a relentless commitment to rescue us when we cannot rescue ourselves. And we saw that Jesus did not come to lower the standard of the law, but to fulfill it completely on our behalf. This means we must return, one last time, to the opening image. Imagine the market again, the heat of the day, the smell of grain, the dust clinging to your feet. In the center of the scene sits the bronze scale. For most of your life, you have probably lived as though you were the one, standing in front of that scale, nervously pouring the grain of your own good deeds onto the metal tray. Every day, you have tried to add enough patience, enough discipline, and enough private morality to outweigh your failures. You have stared at the heavy stone on the other side, terrified that at the end of your life, you will be found lacking. You have believed the lie that God is a harsh merchant, arms folded, waiting to see if you can finally measure up to his impossible standard. But the biblical narrative changes everything about that picture. God has not handed you a scale to measure your worth. God's righteousness is almost always paired with his mercy, his salvation, and his rescue. God's righteousness is not. When humanity broke the relational order and the weight of our injustice threatened to crush us, God did not abandon the market. He did not leave us to balance the unbalanceable debt. Instead, in the person of Jesus Christ, God stepped out of heaven, walked into the dust of our broken world, and placed himself onto the scale. He became the true standard. He absorbed the weight of our failure. He honored the covenant when we could not. This is not ultimately a story about your moral perfection. It never was. It is a story about his covenant faithfulness. You no longer have to wake up every morning and try to earn your right standing before the Creator. The exhausting project of sign management is over. You can finally step away from the paralyzing fear of the ledger. Instead, you are invited to take the overwhelming grace you have been given and pour it out into the relationships around you. You are called to build a life of tzedakah and mishpat, righteousness and justice, not to tip the scales in your favor, but because the scale has already been settled forever. You do not have to carry the weight anymore. The stone is accurate. The standard has been met. The scale is balanced. If this study helped you see the beauty of Scripture more clearly, described as the reason he destroys his broken people, it is the reason he runs toward them. Please consider subscribing and sharing this video with someone who feels exhausted by the pressure of perfectionism. Thank you for walking through the text with me today. The problem is not that the biblical authors were confused about morality. The problem is that our modern English definition of the word is fundamentally disconnected from the ancient mind. We have taken a rich, vibrant Hebrew concept and trapped it inside a sterile Western courtroom. This is not ultimately a story about moral perfection. It is a story about relational faithfulness. So what does God actually mean when he demands righteousness? What is he looking for when he examines a human life? To find the answer, we cannot start in a modern. The merchant reaches into a heavy leather pouch, pulls out a smooth, dark stone, and places it carefully onto one side of a bronze scale. Theology classroom. We have to go back to the dust of the ancient marketplace. To understand what it really means to be good, we have to look closely at the physical stones resting on the merchant's scale. Let us look closer at the stones on that bronze scale. In the ancient Near East, survival was entirely dependent on trade. If you were a farmer exchanging wheat for silver, or a shepherd trading wool for oil, your family's livelihood hinged on a single assumption: the weight the merchant placed on the scale was accurate. But deception was dangerously easy. A dishonest merchant could carry 2 sets of stone weights. In his leather pouch, a heavier set for buying and a lighter set for selling. By shaving off just a fraction of the stone's surface, he could slowly bleed the poorest members of his village dry while maintaining the appearance of a respectable businessman. So, how did an ancient society prevent this? How did they know what a true weight actually was? They created a standard. And in ancient Israel, the ultimate standard was not kept in a royal treasury or guarded by a local magistrate. The standard was kept in the temple. The biblical texts frequently mention the shekel of the sanctuary. The physical stones used to calibrate the entire economy of the nation were held. It lands with a sharp metallic clink. Then, he begins to pour grain onto the empty side, in the presence of God. The divine realm and the marketplace were not separated. To cheat a neighbor in the dust of the market was to violate the order established in the Holy of Holies. God cared intimately about economics because he cared about his people. This is why the book of Leviticus commands the Israelites to maintain honest balances, honest weights, an honest ephah, and an honest hin. But the English translation obscures something vital in that verse. The Hebrew text does not actually use the word honest. It uses the word for righteousness. The command is literally to maintain a righteous scale and a righteous weight. Before it was ever used as an abstract spiritual category to describe human morality. The concept of righteousness was a physical, economic measurement of reality. A righteous stone was simply a true stone. It was a weight that had not been altered, shaved down, or corrupted by human greed. It fulfilled its designed purpose perfectly. When a righteous weight was placed on the scale, the transaction was fair. The vulnerable were protected, and the community functioned properly. To the ancient Hebrew mind, righteousness was not just an internal feeling of private piety. It was the observable reality of the world, functioning exactly as God designed it to function. It was the ancient concept of right order. When the weights were true, the social order was maintained. He watches intently, pouring until the two metal arms level out perfectly. The transaction is complete. The stone is accurate. The poor were fed. The laborer received his exact wages. The widow was not defrauded. A righteous scale meant that reality was aligned with the character of the Creator. This dramatically changes the camera angle of our theology. Righteousness is not merely a private, invisible condition of the soul. It is the visible, tangible outworking of right order in the real world. It is the restoration of balance. But this creates a profound question. We can easily understand how a piece of carved stone can be called true and accurate, but a human being is not a stone. A human life is infinitely more complex, volatile, and prone to corruption. How does a physical measurement in a dusty marketplace become the defining theological standard for human behavior across the entire biblical narrative? To understand how this ancient standard transitions from a bronze scale to the human heart, we have to look beneath our modern language. The shift happens when we examine the Hebrew word itself. To move from the physical weights in the marketplace to the condition of the human heart, we must look at the language the biblical authors actually used. In English, the word righteousness carries heavy cultural baggage. It sounds stiff, religious, and intensely private. The scale is balanced. The reality of the market is functioning exactly as it was designed to. It makes us think of a person with folded hands, pristine morality, and perhaps a subtle sense of superiority. We even use it as a modern insult when we call someone self-righteous. But the ancient Hebrews did not speak modern English. They spoke a language anchored in dirt, stone, and physical reality. The Hebrew word behind our English concept is tzedek, and its feminine form, tzedakah. In its most fundamental lexical sense, tzedek means rightness, order, or a true standard. It is the state of things being exactly as they should be. When a stone weight is tzedek, it is accurate. When a merchant scale is tzedek, it is balanced. When a physical path is tzedek, it is straight, reliable, and leads exactly where it promises to go. This is why the famous words of Psalm 23 declare that the Good Shepherd leads his sheep in paths of righteousness. He is not leading them down a highly moral trail. He is leading them down the right path, the safe path, the true path to water and rest. The English translation is not inherently wrong, but it is dangerously narrow. Over centuries of translation, theological debates, and cultural shifts, the English word righteousness shrank. It retreated from the public square and hid inside the private human conscience. We reduced a massive, holistic vision of cosmic and social order. When most of us hear the biblical word righteousness, we imagine a scale very much like this one. But the scale we picture is invisible, cosmic, down to a personal checklist of bad things we manage to avoid doing. But tzedek refuses to be trapped in a private spiritual checklist. In the ancient Hebrew mindset, you cannot be righteous in a vacuum. You cannot be righteous completely alone in a room. Tzedek is deeply, inherently relational. To be righteous in the biblical framework does not mean you have achieved a state of abstract moral perfection. It means you are fulfilling the demands of your relationships. It means you are doing right by God, doing right by your family, and doing right by the vulnerable people in your community. When you live in tzedek, the relationships around you flourish, because you are functioning exactly as a human being was designed to function within the fabric of creation. If a king uses his power to protect the poor, he is practicing tzedakah. If a farmer intentionally leaves the edges of his wheat field unharvested so the hungry can eat, he is practicing tzedakah. If a neighbor tells the truth in a local dispute, he is practicing tzedakah. Righteousness is not merely the absence of sin, it is the active presence of right relationship. This completely rewires how we read the Bible. When God commands his people to pursue righteousness, he is not telling them to isolate themselves and simply try harder to be good, and entirely focused on our personal behavior. On one side, we imagine God stacking our failures, our hidden thoughts, our broken promises, and our selfishness. He is commanding them to step into the mess of the world and restore the broken balance. He is asking them to be the accurate stone on the scale of their community. But this creates a new tension. It sounds beautiful in theory, but how does this idea of right order apply to messy, volatile humans who constantly fail? If righteousness is about fulfilling relational obligations, what happens when someone shatters those obligations entirely? To see how this word actually functions under extreme pressure, we have to look at one of the most scandalous, uncomfortable stories in the book of Genesis. The air in the village is thick with scandal and impending violence. A pregnant widow is dragged out into the dust. The patriarch of the family, Judah, has already pronounced her sentence: bring her out and let her be burned. The crowd murmurs, waiting for the execution of a woman caught in obvious immorality. But before the fire is lit, the woman, Tamar, sends 3 physical objects to her father-in-law: a personal signet ring, a cord, and a carved wooden staff. She includes a simple, devastating message: I am pregnant by the man who owns these. Judah looks down at the objects in his hands. On the other side, we frantically try to stack our good deeds, our prayers, and our moments of kindness. He recognizes his own ring. He feels the familiar grain of his own staff. He knows immediately that he is the father in this moment of humiliating, public exposure. Judah speaks a sentence that completely shatters our modern definition of morality. He looks at Tamar and declares, "She is more righteous than I." Stop and look at the absolute chaos of this scene. Tamar disguised herself as a prostitute, sat by the side of the road, and intentionally deceived her father-in-law into a sexual encounter. By any standard English definition of the word, neither of these people possesses an ounce of righteousness. They have both violated severe moral boundaries. If righteousness is a pristine behavioral checklist, Judah's statement is absolute nonsense. But Judah is not speaking English. He is operating in the ancient Hebrew framework of tzedek. Years earlier, Tamar's husband, Judah's oldest son, died, leaving her a childless widow. In the ancient Near East, a widow without a son had no economic safety net. She could not own land. She was entirely exposed to poverty and starvation. Because of this, the family patriarch was obligated by a strict cultural and covenantal law to provide a younger son to marry the widow, ensuring she was protected and the family line continued.